because Rabbi Frand was, if not the first, but one of the first to record Shiurim and Halacha in a way that guided the listeners through a sugya. It was always a relevant contemporary sugya, and it made Klal Yisrael aware of the depth, the intricacies, and the sources. Brought to Klal Yisrael an awareness of some of the current poskim that otherwise we would not have known. But overall, to teach halacha in a way that was engaging, it is engaging, in a way that teaches the depth as well as the excitement and the passion in the presentation. So that's something that we take for granted. But Rabbi Frand was the pioneer, and Rabbi Frand made this part of the experience of learning of Klal Yisrael now. And the countless shiurei Torah that are presented in depth, that the people that you are listening to, that I'm listening to day in and day out, and how it fills our lives with Torah. Rabbi Frand was the Mara Derech, and he did it and does it with a consistency every Thursday night. I remember people were looking forward to what would the topic be in the presentation. It's a great schus for us to host Rabbi Frand, who's now, over the years, has become one of the great inspiring voices of Klal Yisrael in our continent. And this is the highlight of our preparations for the Yom Neiron. We are very, very grateful. Thank you very much.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol nהיה b'dvaro. B'reshus Tamar Asra, Run Rabban Rabbi Sai, ladies and gentlemen, I have been introduced over many years by different Rabbanim, different people who run the shul. That happens to have been one of the nicest introductions that I've ever received. Usually when they take the introduction, they take some recorded already thing. Rabbi Frand is a Rabbi of Nerizah, but this was personalized, and it's very meaningful to me. So I appreciate that very much. I know this is the combination of 3 shuls in the area. This shul happens to be a beautiful shul. People don't always take their shul, they take their shuls for granted. This is a beautiful shul. You should go together with your Rav. There is one person that deserves special mention, and that is Mike Gottesman. He got in touch with us, I think in May or June, and about coming for a tshuva drasha. Wer tracht wegen tshuva in May or June? Who thinks about tshuva in May or June? But apparently Dr. Gottesman does. And that's, you just think it's a matter where you call and you set it up. No, it goes through many different iterations. So thank you very much for all your efforts, and should be a schus. Gadol hama'asa yesem and aisa, the person that causes something to happen gets all the schar, or most of the schar. So without any further ado, let me begin what I'd like to share with you tonight. If you like it, it goes to the credit of Mike Gottesman. If you don't, it's my fault. Okay? So it's almost 2 years now since October 7th, 2023, Shmini Atzeres, that the massacre happened, the tragedy. And yet I still feel there's a need to speak about it in this year's Tshuva Drasha. And that's not surprising given that this event has preoccupied our lives, our thoughts, our tefillas, and during this entire whole period. Yet this Tshuva Drasha is vastly different from the tshuva drasha that I gave last year, also on October 7th. Because so much has changed in this last year. I remember reading an article a few weeks after October 7th, 2023. And the article upset me greatly. It was written by a well-known, well-respected rabbinic personality, and it was in a very popular magazine. But it really upset me. His main point was that since this happened on Shmini Atzeres of all days, it could not be bad. I, on the other hand, thought, and I was of the opinion, that this was an unmitigated disaster of epic proportions. To me, October 7th was kulei ra. It was a clap, a hit to the Jewish people. Shmini Atzeres is the day where the Rebbeinu Shalom says to Klal Yisrael, we've celebrated Sukkot for the last 7 days. We included the non-Jews as well. We bought karbonos for the non-Jews world as well. But now stay with me one more day, because it's hard for me to see you go. Everyone else go home. But you, my children, I want you to stay an extra day. And for the massacre to occur on that day, where the day Rebbeinu Shalom says, stay with me, koshalai pridaschem, to me, the Rebbeinu Shalom was telling us, get out. I don't want you here. And I could not see how there's any good to that. The author of this article, again, a respected Rav, based it on a Maisa Shahaya that happened at the beginning of World War II. When Germany and Russia made a pact, the peace treaty, and they decided to divide up Poland. The Jews of Poland were given a choice: accept Russian citizenship or be exiled to South Siberia. There were many Jews that were loath to accept Russian citizenship, Soviet citizenship, this godless society. And they went to their Rav, their Rebbe, Rav Itzkel of Peroshovitz, that's the way you pronounce it. And he advised his Hasidim to reject Soviet citizenship and to go to Siberia. And they were indeed exiled to Siberia. They suffered a horrible life of unbreakable conditions, bitter cold, and back-breaking work. After some time, the Hasidim complained to the Rebbe, to Rabbi Yissocher, and said, look, what do we hear over here? We would be better off staying in Russia, accepting Soviet citizenship. The Rebbe replied, we were sent to Siberia on the 23rd day of Sivan. That's the same day that Mordechai sent letters to all the Jews that the decree has been changed, and now they were granted the permission to go ahead and defend themselves, which turned into the day of Purim. On such a day, he concluded, nothing bad can happen. When they returned from Siberia, they learned that the Jews that had stayed in Vilna and the other towns were wiped out by the Nazis. They understood that the Rebbeinu Shalom had been safeguarding them in the far reaches of Russia, and the 250,000 Jews who survived that exile in Siberia helped seed and rebuild the post-world Jewish community across the world. So this is what the Rebbe said, this cannot be bad. The author of this article, his contention was the same thing for Shmini Atzeres. Shmini Atzeres is a far greater, more important day than the 23rd of Sivan. And if nothing bad could happen on 23rd of Sivan, nothing bad could happen on October 7th. With time, Rabbi Isai, ladies and gentlemen, I softened my stance, and I still cannot say that it's a good day, no bad can come. I still disagree with that. But there is a silver lining to this terrible cloud called October 7th. Eretz Yisrael is in a far better place than they were on October 7th, 2023. Then they were surrounded by enemies bent on their destruction. They were living under the threat of thousands of missiles from the north and the south and from the east. They all wondered how would they protect themselves from these missiles. They were also afraid of the Syrian dictator who would be more willing to join the fight. And that's not to speak of the Iranian threat to literally wipe out the state of Israel on its Jews with an atomic bomb. Now, at least, those threats no longer exist. Hamas and Gaza has been reduced to rubble. Hezbollah has been decimated. The Syrian regime has fallen and no longer exists. And I think that this at least can be called a silver lining. And the hundreds of nisim, miracles, known and unknown, that we've witnessed over this last year, tells us one thing. The Ribbon Shalom still loves us, and he protects us like no other nation, in spite of what happened on October 7th. And if the Ribbon Shalom removes his protection, then anything can happen. That is the story of the Nechashim in the Midbar, the snakes in the Mizbar, and all of a sudden they were attacked by snakes and serpents. Vayishalach Hashem bohemes hanechashim hasrofim vayinashku es ha'om vayamas avram Yisrael. Rav Shamshon Fol Hirsch points out that the pasuk refers to them as ha-nechashim, the snakes, not nechashim. Why are they the snakes? Rav Shamshon Hirsch suggests that those snakes were always there. They were always there. But we were protected by the Ananei Kovid. But when the Rebbe Shalom, for whatever reason he decided to move the protection, guess what happened? They were attacked by those snakes. That's the snakes. Yeder snakes. Those snakes. They're always there. But God protected us. And what happened? That's what happens when Rebbe Shalom removes that protection. Vayamas amrav mi Yisrael. And when that happens, all the advanced electronic wizardry assembled by the IDF to protect the settlements is failed. And for one reason, because for whatever reason it was, the Rebbe Shalom removed his protection, and then we are helpless. And that is exactly what happened on October 7th with Hamas. He removed that protection for whatever reason, and the snakes in the form of Hamas attacked us. And certainly, the 12-day war with Iran was perhaps the most miraculous nace that most of us have ever seen in our lives. I was alive. I was almost 20 years old at the time, at the 6-day war. And they were nisim. And those of you who are old enough to remember the 6-day war, you will remember that as well. But what happened over this last few months, years, is incredible. We have seen the Yad Hashem like we have never seen it before. The pasuk says, "Vayar Yisrael es hayod hagdela asher asan Hashem Mitzrayim." By Kriyas Yamsuf, they saw the Yad Hashem. They saw the hand of God. They saw the upper miracle at Kriyas Yamsuf. Vayirom es Hashem. Vayaminu b'Hashem u'b'Meisha Avdai, and they became believers by witnessing Kriyas Yamsuf. Can we say the same thing? That Vayaminu b'Hashem. Have we changed? Has our emunah increased in any shape or form? Chazal tell us, Masharasa Shivcha Hayom, what a plain maidservant saw at Kriyas Yamsuf at the splitting of the sea. Loiro Yecheskel ben Buzik, the great Nabi Yecheskel, who saw the Merkava, who saw the Shechina. Her nevuah exceeded that of Yecheskel. My good friend Rabbi Yaakov Luben, who was the Rav in Edison, pointed out that he once heard a shmuz from Chaim Shmulevitz in the Mir, that Reb Chaim Shmulevitz wondered, Masharosa Shivcha al Hayom, a Shivcha, a maidservant. So why is she still called a maidservant? She saw the Yad Hashem. And yet the pasuk refers to, Chazal refers to as a Shivcha. You know why? Because she didn't change. She saw the Yad Hashem, but she didn't change. Or as Reb Chaim Shmulevitz put it in Yiddish, Ashivcha bleibt Ashivcha. The Shivcha remains a Shivcha, because she didn't change. And that momentary revelation had no lasting effect on her. And the opportunity was lost forever. The Alter from Kelm once commented on the excitement in the city, the shtetl of Kelm, when the first train came to Kelm. Imagine, this is a shtetl, a backward shtetl, a tiny little town. But when the first train came to Kelm, everybody was amazed. A train. It was going that fast. They couldn't believe their eyes. But the Alter from Kelm pointed out that the cows also noticed the train. And they went ahead and they picked up their heads from their grazing and looked at the train. And guess what? The train passed and they went back to grazing. Valaki bleibt a kliki. Because a cow remains a cow. And that, he told the people of Kelm, you're the same thing. Do we remain like cows when we see the Yad Hashem and just keep on eating? This brings us back to the miracles of the last 23 months. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to strengthen our emunah in a way previously unavailable. So much has happened that borders on open miracles. Of course, one can fall into the trap, which the Torah warns us about, of V'amarta bilvavcha koichi v'oitzim yadi asali es hachayil hazeh. And we can fall into the trap of thinking that it's the brilliance of the Israeli, of the IDF and the Mossad and what they can do. But that's a trap. There's the same Mossad and the same IDF that failed on October 7th. Because that's what God deemed to happen. We saw Nisim. Are we different? Are we like the Shivcha? Are we like the cow? We get weiter? If you think about the confluence of events that fortuitously came together on the 12-day war with Iran, it's nothing short of a minor miracle. The Israeli Air Force was successful in knocking down the entire defense capability of Iran, which is amazing, which enabled the United States to have the confidence to send in the B-2 bombers to destroy the Fordo nuclear site, which was buried under 262 feet of earth with bunker busters that were developed for this purpose. I'm sitting in a train station in Baltimore, Maryland this afternoon, and I get a text from my good friend Rabbi Luban, and he sends me a link to report on Fox News that now the United States Air Force is letting us know what would be behind those B-2 bombers. You think, okay, they go ahead, they take a couple bombers and they send them to, and V'nai Maramen. This article in Fox says 4,000 people worked on this one project. And everybody was in unison and everybody did their job and nobody failed. That doesn't happen normally when you have so many people having to come together. Is that not an ace? And without getting political or endorsing anybody, the involvement of the United States military would never have happened in a Biden-Harris administration. I'm not being political. I'm just stating the fact. You think this would have happened with Kamala Harris? And another thing, the fact that Donald Trump turned his face at precisely the moment that the bullet hit him, that grazed his ear rather than going through his skull, is nothing short of divine intervention. This is not an endorsement of Donald Trump. This is an endorsement of the Ribono Shel Olam. Imagine, it's an ace. He goes like this, and boom, grazes his ear. There's a woman who used to live in Baltimore. She was our oldest son's babysitter. This goes back 50 years. So she moved to Eretz Yisrael in the meantime, and she listens to my shir in Beit Shemesh. So she wrote, said she lives in a community in which there are Kollel men and IDF officers in the same community. So you have a Kollel man, an Avrech, what we call a younger man, and he was in a store shopping, and he had a shopping cart full of groceries, which she said was easily 1,500 shekel. The guy behind him in the line is an IDF officer. He taps this guy on the shoulder and says, "I want to pay for your groceries." Yeah, why is that? He explained that he works on the Iron Dome system. And he had just returned from the Ukraine to help with their system. Recently, he was called back to Ukraine because the Israeli system has a 90% success rate, while their similar system is no better than 50%. So the officer says to the younger man, to the Kollel guy, the only explanation that I have is that you guys who learn Torah and do mitzvahs, you're protecting us. This is from a secular officer in the IDF. Unsolicited, just says, I gotta help a younger man. I have to help a Kollel person. And there were more subtle things, if not nisim, but certainly things that made me ponder. Netanyahu called this operation when he started the war with Iran, he called the Operation Rising Lion. This obviously is a reference to a pasuk in Chumash, Heinom Lavi Yaakov Muchari Isnasa. Behold, it's like a people that gets up like a lion cub and a lion. That was the Parshas HaShavua of the week of the Iran attack. The Parshas HaShavua. Now, Netanyahu was a secular Jew. Was this his own idea? Because of the Parshas HaShavua? He's a Rav and has to darshan? No. So, was it someone from in his cabinet said, hey, call this Operation Rising Lion? Or is it that the Rebbeinu Shalom put that in his mouth? It was too much of a coincidence for me. That Netanyahu, the secular Jew, uses the phrase from the Chumash to describe the operation. Most of you, I'm sure, have never heard the name Rav Naftali Kaplan. Rav Naftali Kaplan is a man that's now in his 90s. I know, I may have asked him. He was a Rabbi in Yeshivas near Yisrael 60 years ago. Subsequently moved there to Israel and became a famous mashkiach there in many different yeshivas. Rav Naftali Kaplan said that when Netanyahu said, with siyata d'shmaya we will be successful, that is a nace. When did the word siyata d'shmaya, where did he learn that? When did he use that? And I'm confident that even if Netanyahu came up with the expression himself, he's not familiar with the Rabbeinu Bachai on that pasuk. The Rabbeinu Bachai writes, "The Yissocher Nacham shehi remez al Mechamas Midyan." This expression of rising like the lion is alluding to the Melchama of Midyan that they went Klal Yisrael towards the end of the sojourn in the Midbar. They fought Midyan. Listen to the words of Rabbeinu Bachai. Shlo nishma milchama kamayhu. There's no such war. Shlo nifkad ish mi Yisrael umesu chamisha malachim. The 5 kings that they fought, they died. There was not one Jewish soldier that lost, that was killed. Zokt Rabbeinu Bachai, Shlo nishma milchama. You never heard of that. Shlo nifkad ish mi Yisrael. Is that not an ace? It is also unheard of that of the 100 of sorties that the Israeli Air Force launched against Iran, not one plane was shot down. An Air Force commander, his name was Tomer Bar, presented an estimate in internal forums that as many as 10 Israeli planes could be downed within the first 70 hours of the war. And we know not one was shot down. And when one of these planes, an F-15, ran into trouble because he was running out of fuel, which would have forced him to land in Iran, he contacted her headquarters, and they said they sent a refueling plane to refuel this jet so that he didn't have to land and be captured. Refueling an airplane in mid-flight is not like going to a Shell station on the New Jersey Turnpike. I still don't cop how they do it. You have to line up the plane with that thing. For me, that's an ace, but okay, it's apparently not an ace. But what happened? 10 planes will be lost? Is that not an ace? At the end of the campaign, the commander of one of the main Israeli Air Force's air bases, a secular Jew, convened a meeting of all his officers, pilots, and key personnel. He opened the meeting with 2 words: Yesh Elokim. You hear that? Yesh Elokim, there's a God. This is from a person that probably doesn't know the pasuk of Kriya Shema. But Yesh Elokim. We were Zechet Nisim. We were able to tell our grandchildren or great-grandchildren, we saw Nisim. Isn't that great? But there's a price for this. And that is, there's a responsibility on us to change. We have to become deeper and more profound ma'aminim. There's a famous story with Rabbi Levenstein, Zechet Tzadik Levracha. Rabbi Levenstein was the mashgiach in the Mir in Shanghai, and then subsequently in the Mir Yerushalayim, and subsequently in the Ponevezh Yeshiva. He once took a cab drive with a secular cab driver. So the cab driver he sees Rabbi Chatzkel, a saintly figure. He tells him a story. He says, my friend and I, after we got out of the army, we went exploring. We were in a forest, and all of a sudden, a snake wraps itself around my friend's leg and starts squeezing. His friend is petrified, doesn't know what to do. He says out, secular Jew, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. The snake releases itself. The guy says to his friend, that's it. I'm becoming a Baal Tshuva. God listened to me. He performed an ace. And he became a Baal Tshuva. So Chatzkel says to the secular cab driver, Uma itcha? And what's with you? Satala mivin. Don't understand. Zakara im achaver shali. This happened to my friend. What does it have to do with me? Are we like that? After 120 years, when we go to the Kisei HaKovod, eventually we say to us, do you remember what I did for you guys? The Nisim? And did you change an iota? Some of you, I'm sure, have heard about the Tefillin campaign for IDF soldiers in Eretz Yisrael. The latest statistics that I found are that there were 2,041 pairs of tefillin have been given to soldiers who committed to putting on tefillin every day. Why? Because they saw the Shiyat Hashem. So you change. Have we done so? Our school says, and I have this in an email, It has distributed more than 500,000 backpack-sized volumes of Chumash and Gemara free of charge to the soldiers, most of whom who are not or were not observant. Because when you see this, hey, this is different. If you haven't figured out by now, this drush is about emunah. So how do we enhance our emunah? For one thing, Chazal told us that we should think about God 100 times a day. You say to yourself, I don't have time to think about God 100 times a day. I'm busy. What do they mean? The answer is, Chazal tell us, Moran Menachos, Hoya Ramei Reimer, Chai Yevonu Levorach Mei Brachas B'chol Yom. You have to make 100 brachas a day. If you make 100 brachas a day, you think about Hashem 100 times a day. Oh, is that so? I never realized that. The answer is because when we go ahead and we make a bracha, we don't think about the bracha. Baruch Ato Hashem Shachol Bevoreh, that you gave me this cup of coffee, that you gave me the ability to smell it, but to taste it. And unfortunately, the vast majority of us, myself included, don't think that when we make the bracha. But imagine the profound change in our lives if we gave that bracha just 10 seconds of thinking about what that bracha means. And if there's one bracha, I'll start with 100 brachas. Don't start with 100 brachas, okay? Start with one bracha. It'll change your life. You know what bracha? The lowly bracha of Asher Yatzar. Asher Yatzar is an incredible bracha. It thanks to Ribbonei Shalom that our body works. And not only the excretory organs of our body. Good health. You don't appreciate good health until you lose it. So when you make the Asher Yotzar, thank God I'm still around and kicking. It'll make God real for us. It did it for Dr. Kenneth Prager, who was a pulmonologist at Columbia University Hospital. He wrote an essay about Asher Yotzar. I don't even know if he's from. I assume he is. He recalls as a child that he thought it was so funny to make a bracha about going to the bathroom. But then he writes, but after seeing patients whose lives revolved around their dialysis machine and other colonostomies and urinary catheters, I realized how wise the rabbis were. That you could go to the bathroom. Over the years, reciting Asher Yotzar has become for me an opportunity to offer thanks for my general good health. However, there was one patient whose story reinforced the truth and reality of Asher Yotzar for me forever. Josh was a 20-year-old student who was in a terrible car crash. He was initially totally quadriplegic. After years of therapy, he was able to walk slowly with a leg brace and cane. But Josh continued to require intermittent catheterization. But then the impossible happened. It is a day that Josh no longer required a urinary catheter. I could not imagine a more meaningful scenario for its recitation. I suggested to Josh, a yeshiva graduate, that he say Asher Yotzar. He agreed. As he recited the ancient bracha, tears welled in my eyes. Josh is my son. And say Asher Yotzar standing. Asher Yotzar is not Tfilas Haderech. My wife, Zion, was makap on herself. She comes out of the bathroom and she stands. I have another suggestion. Be more aware, cognizant of the things that happen in our lives where you see the Yad Hashem. And I have a personal suggestion. On Friday night, before I make Kiddush, and most weeks out of many, just me and my wife. Our children, Baruch Hashem, are married, their own households. 2 of them live in different cities. So it's just me and my wife. So we say to each other, "Nu, how do you see Yad Hashem this week?" You know, I'm not a chassid and I don't say all those things, all those before davening, before Kiddush. Shalom Aleichem, Peshes Chayil, baby, okay? Malitvak. Yeah. But I do say, Moed Hashem Lavanecha Alakay B'Chay Akol HaChesed Asher Asisa Imadi Asher Ato Asid Lased Imi V'im B'nei Beisi Ubruchim Hem Alochecha Shreisim Sanecha Adonai Shalom Melech Shal Shalom Shaloi Barchinu Vashalom Sifkei Desi Ves Kol B'nei Beisi Ves Kol Chol Beis Yisrael L'chaim Tovim L'Shalom. And then I say where I saw the Yad Hashem, which is usually that I have what to say on Thursday night. And she says what happened to her. At least once a week. You know where I got this meaning of saying this, Rabbi, I love him? I was once in South Africa. And there was another Jew there sitting at the Shabbos table as guests. He was there on business. Says his father was in the concentration camp. And every Friday evening, when he would finish his work in the concentration camp, he'd come back and he'd say, I said to myself, if this fellow could say that after working in a concentration camp, I certainly can. And this suggestion can include more than Friday nights. Keep a personal diary, a notebook, a cell phone, whatever. And write down what God did to you. No less a person than Reb Chatzkel Levenstein had a little diary that he wrote down where he saw the Yad Hashem in his life on a daily basis. It was Megillas Yecheskel. And yours could be Megillas Ruvain, or Megillas Miriam, or Megillas Rachel, or whatever. He had a daughter of Chatzkel Levenstein. Her name was Zlata. Chatzkel Levenstein was somewhat of an austere person. He's not the type of father that would go ahead and buy little gifts for his little daughter Zlata. He gave her a notebook and says, every time you write down where you saw the Yad Hashem, I'll give you a ruble or whatever it was. And then there's a course of Megillas Charlie. His name is Charlie Sultan. Sephardic Jew. His friend gave him a letter signed by Ramesha Feinstein and Rabbi Kamenetsky that people should keep a notebook. He did so. And after Charlie Sultan died, his son found 20 notebooks. And you know what else you can do? We can do? Read books about Emunah. And you don't have to be a scholar and read the Chayvus Halvavis, which is the sefer about Emunah, or the Chazon Ish's Emunah B'tochen. There is a plethora of books in English, programs every day, Emunah Daily. But do something. So that when you leave this world and God says, Ich habe gemacht für euch Nisim, I made for you miracles. Was hast du getan? What did you do? And I want to tell you something. Emunah will help in doing tshuva. Because when we stand there and we say, etc., etc. Who's Lefanecha? Who's Lefanecha? It's Rebbeinu Shalom. If it's just a concept, you don't really feel that bad about it. But if God becomes real, and you have a personal relationship with God because you realize what He does for us every single day, so then we slip up, when we slip up and we speak Lashon Hara, or we do other things, or we cheat in business, or we look in places where we shouldn't be looking, I feel bad about it. Because God has been so good to me. He becomes real. The Chofetz Chaim once had to go somewhere, so he hired a horse and buggy driver to take him to wherever he was going. They're driving along, and they pass an orchard. And the driver gets out of the buggy and goes to the tree, and he wants to pull off an apple. The Chofetz Chaim says, "He's looking!" Guy gets scared, goes back to the wagon. A mile later, whatever, see another orchard. Guy gets out of the wagon, goes to the tree. Chofetz Chaim says, "He's looking!" He ain't looking, the guy says. There's no owner here. Chofetz Chaim says, "Yeah, but God is looking." Because of the Chofetz Chaim, God was real. And if charota, regret, is the first step of tshuva, then Kabbalah ha'asid, making up our minds to be better in the coming year, it will also be more real. That's why even though this drasha is about Emunah, but it is a tshuva drasha. Because tshuva will be enhanced, it'll be a bigger tshuva. The Gemara says at the end of Makos, famous Gemara, that the different Nevi'im of the different generations told their generation to concentrate. Of course you have to keep all the mitzvahs, but you have to concentrate on several. David suggested 6. The Yishai suggested a number, until the Gemara says, Bach Habakuk, one of the last of the Nevi'im. Vehemina nalachas. This is for our generation. His generation and our generation, says the Chofetz Chaim generation. And what's our mitzvah? V'tzadik be'emunasai yichya. Work on emunah. I don't know if any of you remember the name Agam Berger. Agam Berger was a hostage in Gaza for 482 days. Before Pesach of this year, she wrote an essay in the Wall Street Journal about her experience and how she remained strong during her long ordeal. She writes, V'zela Shaina. As I left Gaza on January 30th, I wrote in Hebrew the words that stayed with me my entire captivity. I chose the path of Emunah, and with the path of Emunah, I have returned. Imagine that. 482 days. Hell. I went in Emunah, and I came out with Emunah. Some of you, I'm sure, have heard of the Kotzker Rebbe. The Kotzker Rebbe was a very unique Rebbe. He wasn't your touchy-feely type of Rebbe. He wasn't, kukul and nice niggin. He was acerbic. He did not suffer fools gladly. Very few people could become Hasidim of the Kotzker Rebbe. There was a younger man, an Eli, a genius, who had a reputation that he can answer any kasha that the Rishonim ask. So he comes to the Kotzker Rebbe and he proudly says, I can answer the kasha of any Rishon. Kotzker Rebbe says, oh yeah? Can you answer the kasha of the Rav HaChayvel? So the I've never heard of the Rav HaChayvel. Is that a sefer? Who's the Rav HaChayvel? The Kotzker Rebbe says, the Rav HaChayvel is the captain of Yonah's ship. That when the ship was about to sink, and everybody were praying to their gods, and Yonah was sleeping in the hold of the ship. And the Rav HaChayvel comes to Yonah, and he says to him, Ma lecha nir dam? How on earth can you sleep through this? V'hani yach yishva yishaver. How can you sleep? That's what the Kotzker Rebbe told this fellow. Can you answer that question? Malach on the Yerdam. Why are you sleeping? Can we answer that question? Why are we sleeping? We slept through those 12 days. We slept through the last year. We slept. The Rebbeinu Shalom that uns fragen, God will ask us, Malach on Nirdam, how could you sleep through a time like that? That's the message. Work on our emunah. Become bigger maminim, more real maminim. It'll change our lives. It'll change our tshuva. It'll change our lives. It'll change the life of Klal Yisrael.